The research vessel Horizon rocked violently as another wave crashed against its hull. Dr. Samantha Reed gripped the railing of the observation deck, her knuckles white against the steel. The storm had come out of nowhere, transforming the peaceful Pacific waters into a maelstrom of angry swells and howling winds. "We need to abort the dive, Dr. Reed," shouted Marcus, her research assistant, through the cacophony of the storm. "The equipment can't handle these conditions." Samantha knew he was right, but something about the anomalous readings they'd picked up earlier wouldn't let her give up. For weeks, they'd been tracking unusual bioluminescent patterns in these waters, patterns that defied everything she knew about marine biology. Now, just as they were close to discovering their source, nature seemed determined to stop them. 5 more minutes, she called back, adjusting the underwater sensors. The readings were stronger now, pulsing with an almost artificial regularity that made her heart race. This was no ordinary marine phenomenon. The ship's warning system suddenly blared to life, red lights flooding the deck. "Unidentified object approaching." Marcus yelled, his eyes wide as he stared at the radar screen. "It's big, and it's moving fast." Before Samantha could respond, a brilliant blue light erupted from beneath the waves, illuminating the churning water like a submarine sunrise. The ship's instruments went haywire, needles spinning wildly as screens flickered and died. Through the chaos, Samantha saw it, a massive form rising from the depths, its surface smooth and iridescent, unlike any marine creature she'd ever encountered. As it breached the surface, she realized with stunning clarity that she wasn't looking at a sea creature at all. The object was clearly artificial, its hull composed of what appeared to be liquid metal that shifted and rippled like mercury. It rose until it hovered level with the observation deck, water cascading off its surface in luminescent streams. Then, without warning, a section of the hull became transparent, revealing a figure inside. Samantha found herself staring into eyes that were decidedly not human. They were deep violet, with pupils that moved like liquid gold. The figure pressed a hand against the transparent barrier, and Samantha felt an inexplicable urge to do the same. As she raised her hand, Marcus grabbed her arm. "Sam, don't." But she pulled away, drawn forward by something she couldn't explain. When her palm met the barrier, it felt warm, almost alive. A voice filled her mind, not heard but felt, resonating through her very being. "We require your assistance, Samantha Reed." The voice was neither male nor female, but it carried an urgency that made her pulse quicken. The storm continued to rage around them, but in that moment, Samantha felt an extraordinary calm. "Our world is dying," the voice continued. "And yours will follow if we cannot prevent what is coming." The being's eyes shifted, swirling with patterns that seemed to tell a story of distant stars and looming catastrophe. Samantha found herself nodding, though she barely understood what she was agreeing to. What are you?" she managed to ask, her voice barely a whisper. "I am Nyx, of the Stellar Confederation. We have watched your species for centuries, but now we must break our silence. The barrier between our worlds is weakening, and the consequences will be devastating for both our kinds." A series of images flooded Samantha's mind, vast ocean depths warping and twisting, reality itself seeming to tear apart at the seams. She saw creatures from nightmares slipping through these tears, and worse, she saw the fabric of spacetime beginning to unravel. "Your understanding of quantum biology is crucial," Nyx explained. "Your research into bioluminescent patterns has brought you closer to understanding the fundamental connection between consciousness and reality than any other human." Samantha's mind raced. Her work had always seemed to hint at something bigger, something that connected the mysterious patterns of deep-sea life to the very structure of the universe. But this was beyond anything she had imagined. The storm, she realized suddenly. You created it to mask your arrival. A necessary deception, Nyx acknowledged. But time grows short. Will you help us, Samantha Reed? Will you risk everything you know to save both our worlds? Behind her, Marcus was shouting something about emergency protocols and calling for backup. The ship's crew was in chaos, some frozen in awe, others scrambling for emergency equipment. But Samantha stood transfixed, knowing that this moment would change everything, her life, her understanding of the universe, and possibly the fate of two worlds. The rational part of her mind screamed that this was insane, that she should step back, call authorities, follow procedures. Instead, she found herself saying, "Yes. I'll help you." The barrier beneath her hand rippled like water, and before she could react, it parted, drawing her into the alien vessel. The last thing she heard was Marcus shouting her name as the hull sealed behind her, leaving the storm and her old life behind. Inside, the vessel was alive with shifting lights and impossible geometry. Nyx stood before her, tall and elegant, their form both beautiful and utterly alien. "Then we must begin," they said, their actual voice even more mesmerizing than its mental projection. "For in less than 48 hours, the first tear will appear, and once it begins, it cannot be stopped." The interior of the alien vessel defied every law of physics Samantha thought she knew. Corridors shifted and reformed as they walked, responding to Nyx's unspoken commands. Surfaces that appeared solid one moment became translucent the next, revealing glimpses of complex machinery that pulsed with bioorganic energy. "Your oceans," Nyx explained as they moved deeper into the ship, "are more than just bodies of water. They are nexus points, places where the membrane between dimensions grows thin." Their form shifted slightly as they spoke, their silver-hued skin rippling like moonlight on water. "We discovered this truth too late on our world." Samantha followed, her scientific mind racing to process everything she was seeing. "The bioluminescent patterns I've been studying," she ventured, "they're not random, are they? They're reactions to these tears." "Correct." Nyx led her into what appeared to be a control center, though it bore little resemblance to any human technology. Living crystals grew from the walls, each one displaying complex data streams in a language that somehow seemed familiar to Samantha, despite its alien nature. "Your sea creatures sense the impending ruptures. Their patterns are warnings, much like the behaviors your animals display before earthquakes." A holographic display materialized in the center of the room, showing Earth's oceans. Red points of light pulsed at various locations, growing more numerous by the second. "Each point represents a potential tear," Nyx explained. "The first will appear here." They gestured to a spot in the Pacific, not far from where they'd picked up Samantha. "What exactly comes through these tears?" Samantha asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Nyx's expression darkened, their violet eyes swirling with shadows. "We call them the void dwellers. They exist in the space between dimensions, feeding on reality itself. Once they begin to cross over, they create a cascade effect, drawing more tears into existence." The hologram shifted, showing footage from what Samantha assumed was Nyx's homeworld. Her breath caught as she watched cities of crystal and light being consumed by writhing darkness. The scenes were like something from a nightmare, reality itself seemed to fold and crack, allowing massive, impossible shapes to slip through. "Your world has an advantage we didn't," Nyx continued. "The unique properties of your ocean life, particularly the species you've been studying, may hold the key to stabilizing the membrane between dimensions. But we must act quickly." A sudden alarm blared through the ship, its pitch making Samantha's teeth ache. The hologram zoomed in on one of the red points, which was now pulsing rapidly. "It's beginning," Nyx said, their usual calm voice tinged with urgency. "The first tear is forming ahead of schedule." Samantha watched in horror as the ocean seemed to ripple and distort at the marked location. The water itself appeared to be folding inward, creating a vortex that defied natural physics. But what truly chilled her was the darkness she could see through the distortion, the writhing, conscious darkness that seemed to reach toward their reality with malevolent purpose. "Can we stop it?" she asked, forcing herself to think like a scientist rather than succumb to the fear threatening to overwhelm her. "Perhaps." Nyx moved to what appeared to be a control panel, their fingers dancing over symbols that shifted and changed. But we'll need to collect specimens of the bioluminescent life forms you've been studying. Their biological quantum entanglement properties might allow us to create a barrier. The ship lurched into motion, diving beneath the waves with a grace that seemed impossible for its size. Through the transparent hull, Samantha watched as they descended into the darkness of the deep ocean. Schools of fish scattered before them, their patterns flashing with increased urgency, as if they too sensed the approaching danger. "There's something else you need to know," Nick said as they descended. "Your government has detected our presence. Even now, they are mobilizing forces to investigate. We don't have much time before they find us." As if on cue, a distant ping echoed through the ship, sonar from a military vessel. Samantha felt her heart rate increase. She knew how this would look to the authorities, an unknown vessel appearing during a storm, taking an American scientist aboard. They would assume the worst. "How long until the tier fully opens?" she asked, trying to focus on the immediate threat. "At the current rate of degradation, less than 12 hours. Once it opens fully, the void dwellers will begin to cross over. After that." Nix's voice trailed off, but Samantha could fill in the blanks. After that, both their worlds would face the same fate as Nix's homeworld. The ship's light suddenly dimmed, and Samantha felt a change in the energy around them. Through the hull, she could see they had reached the deep-sea thermal vents where she'd first detected the unusual bioluminescent patterns. The sight that greeted them was both beautiful and terrifying. Countless creatures pulsed with light in complex, synchronized patterns she'd never seen before. But interwoven with their natural light was something else, tears in reality, like tiny cracks in glass, each one leaking tendrils of that same malevolent darkness she'd seen in the hologram. "We're not just trying to prevent an invasion," she realized, watching the darkness pulse and grow. "We're already under attack." Nix placed a hand on her shoulder, their touch sending a slight electric tingle through her body. "Now you understand why we chose you, Samantha Reed. Your research wasn't just groundbreaking, it was approaching a truth your world wasn't ready to face. The question is, are you ready to face it now?" Looking at the battle between light and darkness playing out before her, Samantha knew there was only one answer she could give. "I don't think any of us have a choice anymore. We have to try to stop this." As they prepared to collect specimens, more sonar pings echoed through the ship, closer now. Above them, the U.S. Navy was closing in, unaware that they were about to interrupt humanity's only chance at survival against a threat they couldn't even comprehend. The alien vessel's collection systems hummed to life, extending crystalline tendrils into the illuminated waters. Above them, the persistent ping of military sonar grew stronger, accompanied now by the distant rumble of submarine engines. Samantha felt the pressure of time bearing down on them like the weight of the ocean itself. "The specimens must remain in a quantum-entangled state," Nix explained, their hands moving across the living control panels. "Any disruption to their bioluminescent patterns could render them useless for sealing the tear." Samantha watched in fascination as the crystalline collectors gently gathered clusters of the glowing organisms. Each creature pulsed in perfect synchronization with its neighbors, creating complex patterns that seemed to ripple through the water like living mathematics. "These patterns," she said, squinting at the display readings, "they're not just reacting to the tears, they're actively fighting against them." She pointed to where the darkest rifts were slowly shrinking, pushed back by the coordinated light of the sea life. "They're natural dimensional stabilizers." A slight smile crossed Nix's otherworldly features. "This is why we need you, Samantha. Your insight into biological quantum mechanics is remarkable for your species." Their violet eyes met hers, and she felt that same electric connection as before. "You see patterns others would miss." A sudden impact rocked the ship, sending them both stumbling. Warning lights flashed across the control crystals as a mechanical voice spoke in an alien language. "Depth charges," Nix translated grimly. "Your military is becoming more aggressive." Another explosion rattled them, closer this time. The crystalline collectors shuddered, threatening to drop their precious cargo. Without thinking, Samantha rushed to the nearest control panel, her hands moving instinctively across symbols that shouldn't have made sense but somehow did. "If we modulate the ship's quantum field," she said, fingers dancing across the crystals, "we might be able to phase slightly out of sync with this dimension. Just enough to avoid their weapons without disrupting the specimen collection." Nick stared at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "That should not be possible. How did you know how to do that?" Before she could respond, a new alarm sounded. The main display shifted to show the forming dimensional tear. It had grown significantly, now large enough to swallow a small ship. Through its swirling darkness, Samantha caught glimpses of something moving, vast shapes that seemed to fold in on themselves in ways that hurt her eyes to look at. "The Void Dwellers sense our presence," Nick said urgently. "They're becoming more active. We need to finish the collection and begin synthesis immediately." As if in response to their words, the tear pulsed, sending out a wave of energy that made the ship's systems flicker. The bioluminescent creatures responded with a synchronized flash of their own, pushing back against the dimensional distortion. "Look at that wavelength pattern," Samantha gasped, studying the readouts. "It's almost exactly inverse to the tear's energy signature. If we could amplify it somehow." She trailed off as a new sound cut through the ship, the distinctive ping of a targeting system lock. Through the transparent hull, she could see the dark shapes of military submarines moving to surround them. "Samantha." Nix's voice was soft but urgent. "There's something I haven't told you. Something about why you can understand our technology, why you see patterns others can't." Another depth charge exploded, closer than ever. The specimens in the collection chambers pulsed erratically, their synchronization threatening to break down. "Your research wasn't just approaching the truth about dimensional barriers," Nix continued. "It was approaching the truth about yourself. About what you really are." The main display suddenly split, showing two DNA helixes side by side. One was clearly human. The other. Samantha felt her breath catch as she recognized patterns in it that matched Nix's species. "That's impossible," she whispered, but even as she said it, memories began to surface, strange dreams she'd had since childhood, her inexplicable understanding of patterns others couldn't see, her lifelong connection to the ocean. "Your grandmother," Nick said gently, "she wasn't from Earth. She was one of us, a researcher who chose to stay behind, to live among humans. To protect this world from what we knew was coming." The revelation hit Samantha like a physical force. She gripped the control panel, her mind racing through years of memories, seeing them in a new light. Her grandmother's strange stories about the stars, her deep understanding of the ocean, her final words about a greater purpose Samantha would one day understand. A violent explosion rocked the ship, snapping her back to the present. Warning crystals flashed red as the collection chambers began to destabilize. Through the hull, she could see more military vessels arriving, and beyond them, the dimensional tear was growing larger by the second. "We don't have time for this," she said firmly, pushing aside her personal crisis for later. "Those are questions for another time. Right now, we need to save both our worlds." She turned to Nix, her expression determined. "Tell me what we need to do next." Nix nodded, their eyes swirling with a mixture of relief and pride. "We need to synthesize the specimens into a quantum-stable matrix. But to do that, we'll need to get past your military and reach the tear itself." They paused, studying her face. "It will be dangerous. The closer we get to the tear, the more the Void Dwellers will sense your hybrid nature. They will be drawn to you." Samantha looked at the swirling darkness visible through the tear, then at the approaching military vessels, and finally at her own reflection in the ship's crystalline walls. She saw herself differently now, not just a marine biologist who had stumbled into something extraordinary, but someone who had always been part of this story, even if she hadn't known it. "Then let them come," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "We have a way to stop them now. And I'm done running from who I really am." The alien vessel surged forward, its quantum drive humming with power as they raced toward the dimensional tear. Behind them, the military submarines gave chase, their weapons locked on target. But it was what lay ahead that truly terrified Samantha. The tear had grown to massive proportions, its edges crackling with dark energy that seemed to consume the very light around it. "The specimens are ready for synthesis," Nix announced, their fingers dancing across the control crystals. "But we'll need to get much closer to the tear for the process to work effectively." Samantha stood at a secondary control panel, her newfound understanding of the ship's systems feeling more natural with each passing moment. The hybrid DNA in her cells seemed to sing in harmony with the vessel's quantum field, allowing her to sense its operations on an almost instinctive level. "The Void Dwellers," she said, watching the writhing shapes beyond the tear grow more distinct. "They're organizing. Almost like they're forming a pattern of their own." Nix's expression darkened. "They're responding to your presence. Your hybrid nature makes you visible to them in ways pure humans are not. They see you as a bridge between dimensions, a way to anchor themselves in this reality." Another depth charge exploded nearby, sending tremors through the ship's hull. The military was getting better at tracking them, despite their quantum field modifications. On the main display, Samantha could see the tear's energy readings spiking dangerously. "We need a diversion," she said, studying the tactical readouts. "Something to keep the military occupied while we position ourselves by the tear." She paused, an idea forming. "The bioluminescent patterns, we could use them to communicate." Nix turned to her, their violet eyes swirling with interest. "What do you propose?" "These creatures evolved to fight the tears naturally," Samantha explained, her fingers moving across the controls. "What if we amplified their patterns through the ship's quantum field? Project them in a way the military would understand, a message in light." Working together, they modified the ship's external field to channel the bioluminescent patterns. The water around them came alive with pulsing light, forming words in Morse code: "Stop attacking. Earth in danger. We can help." For a moment, the depth charges ceased. The military vessels held their position, clearly confused by this unexpected communication. But their reprieve was short-lived. The tear pulsed violently, sending out a wave of dark energy that made the ship's systems flicker. "They're coming through," Nix warned, their voice tight with urgency. The main display showed massive shapes beginning to emerge from the tear, void dwellers in their physical form, their bodies defying the laws of geometry as they pushed into our dimension. Samantha felt them the moment they fully emerged, a psychic pressure that made her head spin. The hybrid part of her DNA resonated with their presence, creating a discordant harmony that threatened to overwhelm her senses. "Focus, Samantha," Nix's voice cut through the chaos in her mind. Their hand found hers, sending a surge of stabilizing energy through their connection. "Use it. Your dual nature gives you power over them, if you can master it." Drawing on some deep instinct she didn't fully understand, Samantha reached out with her consciousness. She could feel the void dwellers' alien minds pressing against hers, trying to break through, to use her as their anchor in this reality. But she could also feel something else, the synchronized patterns of the bioluminescent life forms, their light a natural barrier against dimensional chaos. "The synthesis," she gasped, fighting to maintain her focus. "We need to start it now. I can help guide it. Through me." Nix hesitated for a fraction of a second. "It could kill you. Using yourself as a conduit for that much quantum energy, your human DNA might not survive the process." Another explosion rocked the ship, the military had resumed their attack. Through the hull, they could see more void dwellers emerging, their impossible forms distorting the water around them. Reality itself seemed to be unraveling at their touch. "We don't have a choice," Samantha said firmly. "My grandmother stayed on Earth to protect it. Now I know why. This is what I was born for." Without waiting for a response, she pressed her hands against the main control crystal. The ship's systems recognized her hybrid signature, accepting her as part of its operations. Energy surged through her body as the synthesis process began, using her quantum-attuned DNA as a template to stabilize the bioluminescent patterns. Pain unlike anything she'd ever experienced coursed through her veins. She could feel every cell in her body screaming as human and alien DNA fought against the massive energy flowing through them. But she held on, guided by some deep ancestral memory of how this should work. Through eyes blurred with tears, she watched as streams of amplified bioluminescence burst from the ship, meeting the emerging void dwellers head-on. The patterns she'd studied for so long were now weapons of light against the darkness, their natural dimensional stabilizing properties enhanced 1,000-fold through the ship's technology and her own hybrid nature. "It's working," she heard Nick shout, though their voice seemed to come from very far away. "The tear is beginning to close." But Samantha could barely hear them. Her consciousness was expanding, connecting with both the light and the darkness. She could feel the void dwellers' alien minds recoiling from the amplified bioluminescence, could sense the tear's edges starting to knit themselves back together. And through it all, she felt something else, a presence she hadn't sensed in years, a familiar warmth that reminded her of starlit nights and stories about the ocean's deepest mysteries. "Grandmother," she whispered, as the world around her dissolved into pure light. Samantha floated in an ocean of consciousness, where light and darkness danced in perfect balance. Here, in this space between spaces, she could see everything clearly, the delicate quantum threads that connected all living things, the complex patterns that held reality together, and the ancient harmony that her grandmother's people had sworn to protect. "You understand now," a familiar voice echoed through her mind. In this realm of pure energy, her grandmother's presence felt as real as it had in life. "This is what I wanted to tell you, but you weren't ready. Why didn't you explain?" Samantha asked, though here, in this place beyond physical form, the question seemed less important than it once had. "Some truths must be discovered, not taught," the presence replied. "Your human heart and our people's wisdom needed to find their own balance. Now, you must choose, between the light and the dark, between two worlds, between what is and what could be." Reality began to reassert itself. Samantha felt the ship's energy coursing through her, felt the massive quantum forces she was helping to direct. The pain was still there, but it had transformed into something else, a burning awareness of her place in the universe. Through the vessel's hull, she could see the void dwellers retreating, pushed back by the synchronized light of 1,000 deep-sea creatures amplified through alien technology and her own hybrid DNA. The dimensional tear was closing, reality knitting itself back together one quantum thread at a time. "Samantha." Nix's voice cut through her expanded consciousness. "You need to disconnect now. The energy levels are too high, your human cells can't take much more." But Samantha held on. She could feel something else happening, something beyond just closing the tear. The bioluminescent patterns weren't just pushing back the darkness, they were teaching reality itself how to resist it. Like antibodies fighting an infection, the light was programming the very fabric of spacetime to recognize and reject dimensional intrusions. "A permanent solution," she whispered, understanding flowing through her. "Not just closing the tear, but preventing new ones from forming." The military vessels surrounded them now, but they had stopped firing. Through the ship's sensors, Samantha could see their crews staring in awe at the spectacular light show taking place in the deep ocean. Human instruments recorded what they could, but the true magnitude of what was happening existed on levels their technology couldn't detect. With a final surge of energy that lit up the ocean like an underwater sun, the tear sealed completely. The quantum matrix of reinforced spacetime settled into place like a healing scar, stronger now than it had been before. The void dwellers were gone, pushed back to their own dimension, and the barrier between worlds was secure. Samantha collapsed, her consciousness snapping back to her physical form. Nyx caught her before she hit the floor, their touch sending cooling waves of energy through her overheated system. "That," Nyx said with what sounded almost like awe, "was not part of our original plan." "Plans change," Samantha managed to say, her voice weak but steady. My grandmother taught me that. As her strength slowly returned, Samantha became aware of another change. The military vessels were now broadcasting on multiple frequencies, demanding communication. But their tone had shifted from hostile to cautiously diplomatic. They saw enough to know this wasn't a threat, she said, studying the incoming transmissions. They'll have questions. Many questions. And what will you tell them? Nix asked, helping her to stand. Samantha looked at her hands, which still seemed to shimmer faintly with residual quantum energy. She could feel both sides of her heritage now, the logical, questioning human mind and the deep, pattern-understanding consciousness of Nix's people. They weren't in conflict anymore, they were parts of a greater whole. The truth, she said firmly. Or at least, as much of it as they're ready to hear. About the tears, about the bioluminescent life forms that help protect our world, about the greater universe we're part of. She paused, a slight smile forming. Maybe not about my grandmother just yet. Some truths take time. Nix nodded, their violet eyes swirling with something that looked like pride. And what about you? Now that you know what you are, what will you do? The question hung in the water-filled air between them. Samantha thought about her research vessel on the surface, about her life's work studying the ocean's mysteries. She thought about Nix's world, about the vast knowledge and experiences that were part of her heritage. And she thought about Earth, about humanity's growing steps into a larger universe they barely understood. I'll do what my grandmother did, she said finally. I'll be a bridge. Between worlds, between species, between what humanity is and what it could become. She looked at Nix, seeing them not as an alien being now, but as a reflection of part of herself. Will you help me? Always, Nix replied, their form shifting slightly to reveal a genuine smile. After all, that's what brought me here in the first place. We've been watching you, Samantha Reed, waiting for you to discover your true nature. Now, perhaps, we can discover what comes next together. As their ship rose toward the surface to meet whatever challenges awaited them, Samantha felt a deep sense of peace. The ocean around them was alive with natural bioluminescence, no longer just fighting against the darkness but celebrating the light. Somewhere, in whatever realm souls inhabit after death, she knew her grandmother was smiling. She had finally found her place in the universe, not just as a scientist, not just as a hybrid between two species, but as someone who could help humanity take its next steps into a larger reality. The dimensional tiers were sealed, but a new door had opened. And beyond it lay infinite possibilities, waiting to be explored.